Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating and highly unique spiritual text by Ryuho Okawa. This book claims to deliver direct messages from the absolute highest spiritual realm, all meant to address the global chaos we're seeing today. So, whether you're deeply familiar with esoteric teachings, or you're just curious about how modern religious movements interpret world events, we're going to break down exactly what this text says, how it builds its arguments, and what it ultimately demands of its readers. Let's get right into it.
Since this book is basically an anthology of different spiritual voices, we've organized our explainer into 5 distinct parts. First, divine justice for humanity. Second, Jesus on global conflicts. Third, Yaidron's cosmic protection. Fourth, Toth on modern controversies. And finally, severe divine warnings.
Okay, part 1, divine justice for humanity, the premise of the secret doctrines. To really grasp these messages, we first need to understand how the book views itself, which is laid out heavily in its preface and afterword. It was actually published right before a massive, nationally broadcast lecture at the Saitama Super Arena. But the absolutely crucial thing here is the authority it claims. The author explicitly states that this text carries the weight of a modern Holy Bible or a Buddhist sutra. It's positioned as a direct revelation of divine justice, something it says contemporary humanity desperately needs right now to navigate our unprecedented global confusion. The preface goes a step further and defines the contents as secret doctrines. Now, what does that mean? Basically, these are esoteric teachings from the highest spiritual realm that are normally kept totally behind the curtain. The text is offering us this cosmic backstage lens on earthly controversies. It essentially argues that standard media reports, they're completely missing the true spiritual reality of what's happening globally. And to deliver this really complex warning, the text systematically presents the channeled perspectives of 3 distinct entities. First, we have Jesus, sharing his true thoughts on Christianity and modern geopolitical conflicts. Then there's Yaidron, a cosmic entity focused on cosmic devotion and spiritual defense. And finally, God Toth, who provides spiritual guidance specifically targeted at North America, tackling climate issues and modern social values. Moving on to part 2, Jesus on global conflicts, a spiritual perspective on geopolitics. We start with our first messenger, a channeled voice of Jesus, who offers some really unexpected commentary on major geopolitical crises. For instance, looking at the protests in Hong Kong, the text says Jesus expresses deep sorrow over the situation. It emphasizes the struggle of the protesters, but it frames their fight as way more than just a political movement. It's described as a desperate bid to protect religious and democratic freedoms from an oppressive, totalitarian regime. You can really see the stark contrast here between standard geopolitics and the book's spiritual perspective. A standard analysis might just look at Hong Kong as a localized clash, state police versus citizens. But this esoteric perspective, it elevates the situation to a cosmic scale. It asserts that Hong Kong literally represents the fire of freedom, and it warns that if this fire is extinguished, it won't just affect one city. It's going to trigger massive, cascading misfortune all across the globe. This cosmic, zoomed-out perspective continues when the text looks at the Middle East, specifically tensions involving Iran. Interestingly, the channeled Jesus strongly argues against using military might to dictate divine justice. So instead of picking sides in a holy war, the text suggests that a country like Japan, which sits outside the immediate religious friction of that region, should step up and act as a neutral mediator to foster understanding instead of violence. All right, part 3. Yaidron's cosmic protection, defending the faith from malicious forces. Now we shift gears to Yaidron. In the lore of this book, Yaidron is presented as a powerful cosmic protector. And this chapter is intensely focused on vigilance. Yaidron doesn't just critique the outside world, he actually delivers a really stark warning to the believers themselves. He calls the religious organization extremely naive and says they are in a highly defenseless situation. Basically, they're failing to realize that real-world ideological adversaries are actively creeping up on them. The rhetoric here gets incredibly intense and militant. Yaidron essentially asks, is it necessary to unleash a flash of lightning from the heavenly realm? Do they need to deploy spiritual electric shocks to repel these malicious forces? It's a very direct call to abandon passivity. It asks believers to embrace a kind of holy anger, to actively push back against what the text describes as evil vibrations. To fix this defenselessness, the book literally lays out a step-by-step mindset for spiritual defenders. Step 1, discard that organizational naivete. Step 2, overcome your inner doubts and what it calls weak faith. And step 3, take action. Believers are commanded to step out into various sectors of society to actively, tangibly defend their teachings and their leader.
Now for part 4, Toth on modern controversies, reevaluating climate and society.
This section is arguably the most provocative. Here, the channeled spirit of God, Toth, tackles some of the most polarizing controversies in modern society, aiming his message squarely at North America. This perfectly illustrates the massive divide between today's secular consensus and the book's esoteric framework. For example, where standard science says increased CO2 is a dangerous driver of global warming, Toth argues it might actually be a good thing. And regarding LGBT movements, which modern society largely views as an essential expansion of human rights, Toth frames them as symptoms of a purely materialistic worldview. Let's look closer at both of these claims. So, on climate change, Toth actually argues that reducing carbon emissions could be detrimental. The text asserts that higher carbon dioxide levels could promote agricultural growth, bring more rain, and literally green expanding deserts, like the Gobi Desert or arid parts of Africa. It is a complete 180 from modern environmentalism, totally driven by the text's unique spiritual logic. Then, the text pivots to a stringent, spiritually based critique of LGBT movements and same-sex marriage. Toth describes these modern values as somewhat insect-like or animalistic. Now, within the context of this book, what that means is that these movements are entirely grounded in the physical body and materialism. The argument is that they completely forget that humans exist by divine permission, totally ignoring the eternal realities of the soul, heaven, and hell. And that brings us to part 5, Severe Divine Warnings, Earth's Cosmic Evolutionary Mission. So you're probably wondering, how does this text tie all these wildly different topics, from Hong Kong to climate change to human rights, into one cohesive worldview? Well, the Afterword gives us the answer. It makes it crystal clear that none of these assertions are meant to be mere political talking points. Instead, they are framed as severe divine warnings. The text insists that Earth is in the middle of a cosmic evolution, and the global chaos we see in the news, it's actually a spiritual test for humanity. According to the book, this cosmic mission means humanity has to navigate these crises in a highly specific way. We must actively resist totalitarian suppression, like we saw in Hong Kong. We must categorically reject materialism in both our environmental science and our social values. It demands we recognize the reality of the spiritual realm and its cosmic protectors. And ultimately, it says we have to align our idea of global justice solely with the Creator's intent, not human politics. And that leaves us with a final, really fascinating thought. Regardless of where you personally stand on any of these highly charged issues, how does applying this esoteric framework of cosmic evolution and divine justice fundamentally change the way we interpret modern crises? It really forces us to ask, are the conflicts we see on the news just political? Or, as this text argues, are they actually deep, spiritual battles for the future of humanity? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning and keep learning.